class, this is a review for Chapter 41, the Animal Body and Principles of Regulation, Chapter 54, Ecology of Individuals and Populations, and finally Chapter 55, Community Ecology. So to start off with Chapter 41, we start with the levels of organization, and this is specific to vertebrates. So vertebrates, again, are going to be animals that have a vertebrae, also known as a backbone. So these are traits that are specific to vertebrate bodies. So the first one, which is the smallest level, is cells. Then you move to tissues. Then you go to organs and organ systems. They give you a fun fact that vertebrates have 210 different cells. As far as tissues, there are different layers and then there are different types. So for the layers, those are called endotherm, mesoderm, and ectotherm. As far as tissue types, the 4 types of tissues are epithelial, connective, muscle, and nerve, and I will show you pictures of these. So just give me 1 second. When we're differentiating between the organs and organ systems, organs are just like a lung, hearts, liver, so organs. And then how is that different from an organ system? Organ system would be, for example, the reproductive system, the digestive system, the respiratory system. So that is a difference between the system and the actual organ. They give you a picture of the 4 levels of organization, the smallest being the cell, then going to tissue, organ system. So this probably doesn't look like a typical cell, but we know that it's a cell because it has the nucleus right there. And so if you look at this versus this, in this picture I have several of these cells because you can see all of the nuclei. So this is a group or a cluster of cells, and this is just one singular one. So cell versus tissue, and then organ, which is part of the organ system. For epithelial or epithelia, this is a protective barrier, so this is your skin basically, and there's different types and layers as well. For the 2 layers, there's the simple or the stratified, and then the different shapes. These are shapes right down here. You can have flat or, and which we call that squamous. So squamous is a flat epithelial cell. You have cuboidal, which looks like a cube, and then you have lastly columnar cells, which looks like a column. And then they have some pictures for you so you can kind of see them. So you see this is a flat cell, so a squamous. Then you have cuboidal, which is cube-like, and then you have the columnar, which is the column-like cells. For connective tissue, you have either loose or dense connective tissue, and then there are special types of connective tissue, one of which most people are not familiar with is blood. That blood is actually a tissue. So blood, there's bone connective tissue as well as cartilage. Cartilage is like your nose, your ears. I'm trying to think of other places that have like large cartilage, but yeah, cartilage versus bone and blood. Another type of connective tissue are fat cells. Specifically, they're called adipose cells. And so, I think we all know what fat cells look like, but there you go. That's another type of connective tissue. We had said that you can have either loose or dense connective tissue. Here you can see this one is the dense version, and that, like how they're kind of compressed together. So that one is dense connective tissue versus loose. So here they say that, let's see, the typical location is tendons, so sheath around the muscle. So this is really going to help with movement. These are the 3 that we spoke about earlier as far as special types of connective tissue, such as blood, bone, and cartilage. Bone tissue is probably really unique. The way it looks, it's kind of like, almost like a sponge kind of look. So very interesting. But yeah, these are, for sure, these are connective tissues, cartilage, bone, and blood. For muscle tissues, We have three kinds: the smooth, skeletal, and the cardiac. So let's go ahead and take a look at some pictures. They have like the shapes and all of that. I don't really need you to worry about that. I just need you to worry that there are different types of muscle tissue, and where they're located and their purpose. So the cardiac muscle, obviously you know that cardiac muscle is for like the heart. So cardiac muscle is a muscle that is for the heart. You have skeletal muscle, for which is going to probably surround the bones and helps with movement. And then you have smooth muscle. See, it says the walls of blood vessels. So there's different types: smooth, skeletal, and cardiac. For nerve tissue, so for you as a vertebrate, you have nerves, and that really helps you, I don't know, it helps your reaction. Like if you were to touch a hot stove, your body doesn't have to think about anything. Like you yourself, you don't think about taking your hand off. Your body automatically takes your hand off of the hot surface. And it's really interesting how that works. But yeah, so the signal is sent, like as soon as you touch that hot plate, the signal through these neurons, this is what we have a picture of down here. The neurons, they're all kind of connected together. There'll just be several neurons, and they send the message to the brain to involuntarily move your hand away from the hot plate. But that's really interesting. But that's how that's done with these neurons. So neurons are tissues, and so they're really strange in the way that they look. They almost look alien-like. But you can see the nucleus is there in the middle. You could even see some of the little organelles. But so this is the nucleus. This is the cell body. But then it also has the axon. It also has a sheath on top, which is this like in blue. And then you have the neuromuscular junction. But yeah, this is a neuron. And so that's how you're able to send signals to the brain to do specific functions. That's going to segue us to the next chapter, talking more about species interactions, and ecology. So ecology is how organisms relate to one another and to their environments. It's not a easy concept just because ecology brings in a lot of different factors that can influence other species. So, but some of the key elements are temperature, water, sunlight, and soil. So this is what influences species. And so we kind of call that a response. So if something happens, there's a change in temperature, change in water amount, we will have a response from a species. But also, if it's within the body, we call the response homeostasis, which is just the body's ability to maintain a stable environment. There's several wordings of it, but I think you all kind of have a sense of what homeostasis is. One of the important things is that this is individual. It's an individual thing. So some of the ways that animals or a species can cope with something, if there's a change in the climate, change in food availability, etc., is you can have a physiological response, which is internal, like how inside of your body. You can have morphological, which is exterior, how the animal looks, and then behavioral. Examples of behavior is like either a learned response or even something like migrating. So physiological, the examples they give you are sweating. Like if it's hot, your body is going to sweat. The opposite could be said if it's cold. If it's cold, you're going to shiver. A morphological coping mechanism, the example they have here is thick fur coats during the winter. I'm trying to think. There's another good example that actually, I don't think that they show, possibly. I'll kind of wait. But another really good example is like polar bears, how polar bears have really, really small ears. And that's just because they live in a cold environment. And so body heat does come out through your ears. So their body has small ears so that they're able to retain the warmth a lot better. And behavior, we said already, good example is migration, which is moving from one habitat to another, or just maintaining body temperature. Here's some pictures to kind of show you the difference. So behavioral response, if he is cold, like this is a lizard. Lizards are what we call ectotherm, meaning that they are not able to self-regulate like we can. We always have a body temperature around 96 to 98 degrees Fahrenheit. They are not able to do that, so they rely on the sun. So if he is cold, then he needs to go out in the sun, and that's a behavioral response. Morphological is what we said, that the way that they look. So for this guy, he can have a thick fur coat, he can have small ears, and so that's how he is able to adapt to whatever is thrown at him. For him, I guess he's in a really cold environment. And actually, this tells you that his fur is influenced by if it's either winter or summer. For species distribution patterns, it is random, uniform, or clumped, and then I inserted this picture for y'all to kind of get a sense of it. So clumped spacing, good example is like how these elephants here are in like clusters or clumps. Another good example could be like herds, like this is a herd of elephants, a herd of antelope. So herds is a really good example of clumped. For uniform, these are just like how they're uniformly spaced apart. Another good example could be like, it's not natural, but like an orchard, how orchards just have all of the orange trees evenly spaced apart. That's an example of uniform. This is really unlikely that this occurs naturally. Like it can occur naturally, but this one is least likely to happen. And then the example of random is just that you have flowers randomly, like here's a patch without some, so it's just random. So these are different types of species distribution patterns. When we study populations, we study them based on their demographics. So this could be the type of animal. It could be, well, yeah, the type is pretty much like if we're thinking about for in the United States demographics, typically when we speak about demographics, there's different like categories. Like you can have the high income or low income. You can even go to race, you can go to age, you can go to weight. So it's just kind of like categories for animals. When we are talking about populations, specifically survivorship and survivorship curves, this is a really good graph that kind of shows you patterns, known patterns of animals and their life expectancy. So like for humans, the type 1 survivorship curve, what this is saying is that they live for a long time, basically, right? They live until 100. But from birth, they have a really high survival rating. And then around, I guess if this is in years, percent of maximum lifespan. It's not in years, but so let's say that it was in years. So like for humans, it's saying that they are born, and for the most part, a lot of humans live because their mom is nursing them, et cetera, et cetera. They're not just like, when they're born, they're not just left there like other animals do. They are nurtured, and then around maybe 75, 80 years, humans start to die. A good example, the Hydra. I'm not sure if you're familiar what a Hydra is, but I can think of a better example. If you were at the Speaker Series event, he was talking about birds, migratory birds and songbirds. So this is what this is showing you, is that at any point in a animal's life, specifically if we're talking about the birds, at any point in that bird's life, it is able to either live or die. And so in the talk, he was talking about how cats are a really big challenge, and the cats are kind of why the songbird numbers are so low. So this is a great example. At any point in a bird's life, he doesn't matter how fast he is, how well he's eating, there could just be a cat, and that could take that animal's life at any point of its time. So, okay, and then the last one, since birth, it's saying that these are oysters, by the way. When they're born, a lot of them don't make it. and it just kind of keeps going in that trend. So oysters are just a lot of them are born, and then a lot of them die, and then they just kind of keep dying all throughout. So these are, again, survivorship curves. On the opposite spectrum, as far as growth, there's two types of curves shown on here. The red one is what we call exponential growth, and the blue is what we call logistic growth. For this blue one, it does show both. Like from here all the way to here, this is exponential, this is exponential growth, and then it starts to level off. So some of the things I really need you to remember is that if this is a species and it's growing, it cannot keep growing because it runs out of things. So a species will run out of resources. It could either run out of space, it could run out of water, food, or even mates, right? So just know that there is a limit. A species cannot, or a population cannot just keep growing. There is a time where there's no more resources, and we call that the carrying capacity, which is this dotted line. So once a species hits the carrying capacity, which is limited resources, whether it be space, food, water, etc., once it hits that, it will not go any further. It might go like maybe a little bit more, but then it'll drop back down, and you'll kind of see this like going back and forth because it cannot go past that limit. So again, carrying capacity, and we represent that with the letter K. So K is for carrying capacity. A population cannot go past the carrying capacity. And then N is just the number of individuals in a population. Some things that can influence a population we call them either density dependent or independent. So let's start with independent because that one might be easier. So factors that are density independent are things like natural disasters, like a fire, a flood. I'm trying to think of other things that are natural. Volcanoes, even drought. Those are density independent. For density dependent, this is within the population. Factors that affect the population and depend on the population size. So this could be that there's too many. There's too many of them. There's too little of them. Competition. So density dependent versus density independent. We spoke about resource availability. If there are limited resources, that really does pose a threat to the population size as well as the gene pool. And so we have these two types of populations. We call them either K or R selected. And so the K selected populations, it says they're adapted to thrive when the population is near its carrying capacity. And I'm trying to see, they don't have any other things that, and I wish I had a picture for you. I don't think I do. Let me see. Selection will favor individuals that can compete. Resource availability, when resources are limited, the cost of reproduction is high. Okay, let's talk about that. So when resources are limited, the cost of reproduction is high. So this is saying that you cannot have as many young if you have limited resources. So if you are in an area that there is limited food or limited space, you're not going to be reproducing. These types of animals are typically larger. K-selected species will be things like an elephant, a human, things that have lower reproductive rates versus animals that reproduce really fast, like a cockroach produces really fast, or a mouse. Right? And so on the opposite side of the spectrum, we call those R-selected species, that they have high reproductive rates. So like we said before, the cockroaches, the mice, I'm trying to think of other things that reproduce fast. I guess rabbits as well. So K are going to be large organisms, or not large, but maybe larger organisms that have their offspring in fewer numbers. Like for humans, they typically have one offspring. Same with the elephants, they have one. For the cows, they have one offspring. Versus our selected species, they have many offspring. So that's the difference between the K and the R selected species. When we're speaking about a community has different species. So this is a really great picture because you can see that there are different species within this picture. And so all of this together is what we call a community. And things that influence it are going to be the species richness, which are numbers of species, and the productivity or primary productivity, which is the amount of energy produced. So just to reiterate, a community is just different species and how all of the species interact with each other. And so another thing when they're interacting is that they're also competing. So there's a good picture here of a tree and how there are different types of lizards living. That one's actually really pretty. They're living on different parts of the tree because of competition. So they will probably eat different things. Different insects will live on different parts of the plant. And so this is how they're able to coexist. And so we call that resource partitioning, but that is due to competition. When we're talking about the way an animal looks, we've got a frog here with this really like warning sign, like yellow and black, like really bright, stay away from me, I'm toxic, I can hurt you. We call this aposematic coloration. Another good example could be the milk snake or the, it's a water snake, which is the venomous one to the milk snake. The coral snake, there we go. Coral snake and the milk snake, they have the red, yellow, and black. That's another example of aposematic coloration, which is just a warning sign that I'm toxic, I can hurt you. Types of mimicry that are really cool are what we call Batesian and Mullerian. So I've got some butterflies here, and so these down here are mimicking these up here because it may be that these are toxic and these are not toxic, and so they're trying to replicate that so that birds don't eat them. That's really what it is for, because birds either will know by learned behavior that, oh, this one is hurt my stomach, so I can't eat any more like that. And so that's why they kind of all look like each other. So Batesian is when it mimics something to look distasteful. And again, birds remember. Birds will eat one and then it will taste bad, and so then they won't eat the other ones. So for the Mullerian, these are poisonous. They're unrelated but poisonous to resemble one another. So Batesian is distasteful and Mullerian is for the poisonous ones. So a good example, local, is like the monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly itself is poisonous, but the queen's butterfly is not. But the queen's butterfly mimics the monarch so that birds see it and think that it's a monarch and therefore won't eat it. So that one is a really good example of mimicry. How species interact with each other is what we call symbiosis, and there's different types: the commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism. It's a beautiful picture. I've got a bat, and then I have that it's pollinating the flower of the cactus. So from these three, which one do you think it is? I'll give you like 5 seconds. Do you think this is an example of commensalism, mutualism, or parasitism? Did I say 5 minutes? I meant like 5 seconds. Well, if you guessed mutualism, you are correct. So mutualism means that both organisms benefit from the relationship. So the flower is benefiting because the flower is getting pollinated, and then the bat benefits because the bat comes and he's able to drink the nectar. So this is a mutualistic relationship. Both parties benefit. Commensalism is when two species are interacting interacting. One benefits and the other gets nothing out of their relationship. They're not hurt, but they also don't benefit. So commensalism is that one benefits and the other one receives nothing. So we call that a neutral interaction. They give you the example of Spanish moss, and so the Spanish moss is the brown stuff that you see here. Epiphyte means that it's a plant living on another plant. And so the moss is not hurting the tree, but the moss is benefiting because it gets to live somewhere and photosynthesize, etc. This could become a problem though. This could turn from commensalism to a negative relationship because it could eventually just cover the tree and then the tree is not able to have its own leaves photosynthesize. So, but at the moment, this is an example of commensalism. Mutualism, we already said, is when both parties benefit. So here the example they give is ants and acacias. So the ants are getting food out of the relationship, and then the acacias give them the food, and then the ants give protection from the herbivores. For parasites or parasitism, this is when one of them benefits and the other one is hurt from the relationship in a negative way. This could even lead to like death from the host, which is this one, right? Like a parasitoid. It feeds on the body, killing it. So, but parasitism is when one is benefiting and the other one actually gets hurt, and it could actually kill the host. The last thing that we'll leave off with are keystone species. A keystone species is kind of like an indicator species, and so they are kind of like the forefront of I guess a community. Yeah, we'll say that. So let's go ahead and read this really quickly. It says beavers construct dams and transform flowing streams into ponds, creating new habitats for many plants and animals. So this is saying that without the beaver, you're not able to create new habitat for many plants and animals. Another really good example are elephants. Because elephants are so large and strong, they're able to change an environment. They can uproot trees, they can change the flow of water. So an animal that is able to transform an area is what we call a keystone species. And with that, that's it. So thank you guys for listening, and you can go ahead and take your test, and I hope you all do very well.